intelligence is already impacting American and global society for good. For example, AI is leading in helping developing vaccines. When once it would have taken years to develop a vaccine to deal with variants for a virus, AI is now assisting America's pharmaceutical companies in real time to reach new vaccines to deal with emerging pandemics and threats. AI is also securing networks. It's verifying identity to make e-commerce seamless. It's enhancing public safety by helping residents protect themselves from wildfires and fighting human trafficking. It's also promoting financial inclusion. Today's program will feature months of collaboration between CTech and the Deloitte AI Institute, examining perceptions and solutions dealing with AI's benefits and, yes, even some of its risks. We thank the Deloitte AI Institute for your partnership and appreciate your participation today, too. You'll also hear from both Deloitte and CTech about the findings in that report and some potential solutions that we can work to along the way. After that, you'll hear from a panel of industry experts from Bank of America, AHIP, and Google on the need for trustworthy AI and its benefits for the digital economy and today's global digital ecosystem. AI is helping today to solve many of the problems that we are currently facing, and also has much potential for future challenges ahead, whether it be pandemics, enhancing financial inclusion, and making society better overall. In combination with new technologies like cloud and 5G, we'll continue to see new revolutions in problem solving and in technology that we actually don't even know today. There will be many questions about the role of government and policy and how that should shape the future of AI going forward. And what I will add is that CTech will be undertaking a greater leadership role on these issues, and we ask you to keep tabs on us as we will have some announcements in the next few weeks, bringing together stakeholders and policymakers to develop solutions to AI risks and challenges. Without further ado, I'd like to kick things off to Matt Perlow, Policy Director at CTech, to lead our discussion on the findings of our paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jordan, and much appreciate that. So I'm Matt Perlow, Director of AI Policy at CTech, and kind of one of the co-authors of the paper. So I think first we'll have Bina with Deloitte to kind of present some of the key findings of the paper, and then I'll move into policy recommendations. So Bina, I will kick it up to you. And also, could we add the slide deck, please?
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name is Bina Amanat. I lead the Global Deloitte AI Institute, and I'm so excited to be here today with you talking about this very important and very timely report that we co-authored with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Our Trustworthy AI Innovation and Investment Report examines how the public and private sectors can work together to ensure the benefits of AI are fully realized. We need these groups to work together to ensure that concerns over its risks do not dampen innovation. And all the end goal of helping the United States lead globally, not just in AI capabilities, but in realizing trustworthy AI, a core commitment of Deloitte and the US Chamber. Our paper presents the opportunities and challenges of creating trustworthy AI and explores how government policies can help mitigate AI risks and amplify its benefits. We then discuss public policies that could help achieve those goals, specifically focusing on federal investments in AI research and development, and on government adoption of trustworthy AI technologies. The recommendations in our paper are based upon a survey of 250 respondents who worked in a wide cross-section of industries in the US, with nearly half, 44% of them in C-level or equivalent roles. Next slide, please. So I've been working in the AI space for a while now. Actually, can we go to the next slide, please? So I've been working in the AI space for a while now, and like me, I'm sure you've seen a lot of good stories about the benefits of AI in the press, but also a lot of uncertainty as it relates to AI. So we set out to unpack that a bit, and respondents to our survey largely felt that consumer trust in AI systems could increase if they saw some kind of personal benefit from AI. 71% of our respondents believed that consumers would see benefits from the ability of AI in identifying patterns or anomalies in complex and diverse data sets. 56% indicated that consumers would gain trust in AI if the AI increased their productivity, helping them eliminate low value tasks or helping them improve the speed and accuracy of their decision making. Respondents also indicated that workers could become more confident in using and working with AI systems as they saw it improve their day-to-day work experience, safety, and professional opportunities, with 62% highlighting improved safety on job sites being a key factor. Next slide. However, as we've seen in the papers, the development of AI technologies highlights several potential risks that may lead to less consumer confidence. When respondents were asked to identify which concerns about AI technologies were likely to impact a reduction in customer trust, 68% identified biases in influencing decisions made by AI applications could diminish trust, and 56% identified a lack of explainability of AI algorithms as something that could impact or diminish consumer trust in AI. So what can we do? How can we increase consumer trust in AI so that we can all get the benefits of a trustworthy AI future? How can we ensure our models are fair and unbiased? How do we explain why an algorithm picks A over B? To build consumer trust in AI, we need to be able to answer these questions, and public policies can play a huge role in the mitigation of these risks. Historically, the federal government has provided financial support and the establishment of policies for the safe and responsible implementation of transformative technologies. In the early 1900s, with the adoption of automobiles, this led to reckless driving. So the National Safety Council promoted safe driving practices and introduced shatter-resistant windshields, steel frames, and hydraulic brakes so that they could build trust in drivers. With the invention of cars, people initially worried that cars would scare away, the use of horses. What they didn't realize was that this kind of transformation could bring together communities, expand the speed and opportunity to deliver goods and services, impacting industries far beyond the transportation industry. And AI has the same potential to do this, and we just need to put in those guardrails and build up the trust. Next slide. So just like the cars where the government stepped up, the government can play a significant role in mitigating the risks of AI. And when we asked respondents to our survey, they were confident about the ability of the government to influence the direction of AI innovation toward greater trustworthiness, mitigating AI risks and enhancing AI's benefit. When they were asked about the ability of the government to mitigate risks associated with AI technologies, 72% indicated that the government could mitigate acceleration of social divides between workers with and without AI skills. 69% suggested that the government could encourage accountability for AI decisions. Respondents also overwhelmingly agreed that the government could contribute to increased consumer trust in AI by enabling its benefits. 85% expressed confidence that government policies could increase the likelihood that new materials, medicines, and other products would result from AI innovation. And 68% of respondents believed government could support the removal of subjectivity and personal bias from business processes through expanded use of AI and adoption via more robust standards. So you're likely thinking the same thing now that we've been considering. So now what? We are all aligned that the government could help build consumer trust in AI, and there are policies the government could put in place to increase that trust in AI. But where do we start? Well, 70% of respondents supported government investment in fundamental AI research. 83% agreed that government investments will enable trustworthy AI innovation. And 61% advocated for government investment in fundamental research, specifically at the early stages of AI development. This tells us that consumers feel that AI is new and nebulous and ever changing, and for consumers to be able to trust AI models and embrace its possibilities, consumers want to know more. They want to rely on the research to understand how we can build a future filled with trustworthy AI. They want the public and private sectors to do their homework, share knowledge, and establish partnerships that promote the deployment of trustworthy AI. Now, Matt is going to talk to you about exactly some of the key policy recommendations that we are making to build a trustworthy AI future. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Bina. And could we move to slide 7, please? So part 2 of the research report kind of examined this thesis. Okay, we have these risks and benefits. We've identified them. We've shown how respondents indicated that government can play a role. So the question then becomes, what are the specific public policy solutions? And before going into the recommendations, I just want to kind of provide a methodology of why we chose the recommendations we did and kind of an explanation of our thinking. So I think first, there's a general theme of that almost all these recommendations indicate a shared responsibility between government, the private sector, civil society, and academia. We all need to collaborate together to help advance these solutions and make sure they're implemented properly. Also, too, and as you will see, we do not cover every single policy solution under the sun. We've only selected a few. Now, that does not mean that we don't support other solutions, but this at least kind of provides a starting point for us to have that conversation. The reason we identified these ones is we talked to a series of experts beforehand, both internally and externally, to kind of get a sense of what are the common ideas that are being talked about. Also, too, one common theme running through all of these solutions is that they're cross-sectoral and cross-application. We wanted to avoid a situation where we just had a solution like applied just to automated vehicles, for instance. A couple of other notes. Policymakers have acted on some of these or have started to act on some of these. So we kind of, these solutions can be divided into several buckets. The first is, funding. A lot of, oftentimes Congress enacts legislation, but of course needs funding to fully implement it. Second is executive branch implementation of legislative actions. Then third is kind of an expansion and creation of new programs that kind of builds on what government is already doing. I think the key message here is U.S. government is acting already. They're doing a lot of really great stuff, but there's more that can be done. I'm not going to go through each and every single policy recommendation. I don't want to bore the group that much, but I highly recommend that all of you take a full look at the report, which looks at and discusses each recommendation and also indicates where on the priority level each policy recommendation should be. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So this first set of solutions looked at about 6 different ones. I want to highlight a couple here. The first, and this was briefly covered by Bina, but this is fundamental AI R&D. And obviously the federal government plays a really important role in helping in research and developing, especially in basic research, kind of those areas where the private sector and others aren't as willing to engage in. And why is this important? Why is this related to trustworthy AI? First, they can help inform the development of various standards and processes. And they can also help address key issues within AI, such as AI safety, fairness, bias, but also not just in the hard sciences context, but also in the social sciences context. And this is where, where research and development is a little different than a lot of areas, and where you need to bring in concepts from, sociology, anthropology, ethics, and philosophy. And that's a key component of ethical and trustworthy AI as well. And the key here is sustained funding. Congress has enacted legislation last Congress called the National Artificial Intelligence Act, which authorizes programs in these key areas. The next one is our kind of voluntary consensus standards that are often industry-led. And these standards are, especially for the folks who are, in the tech space, voluntary industry consensus standards are really the backbone of a lot of policy. It helps bring different stakeholders together to kind of at least have a baseline of, how we should think about it. It improves harmonization across sectors and harmonization across countries. And also they can help form the basis of future regulations. For example, trying to get a standard or common understanding about bias or fairness may be helpful to help kind of determine any future regulatory action on that topic. So here, I think the key thing is helping drive research to help support the development of those standards, and also prioritizing government entities such as NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, to help move those forward and help kind of encourage kind of private sector standards organizations, ISOs, to help kind of advocate for that. Finally, a key role that policymakers can play here is ensuring that standards are actually moving through oversight and accountability measures. Next is open government data and models, and this is one that is not unique to AI, but because data is such an important ingredient for many AI applications, open government data can really help spur a lot of new innovation in AI. Also, it can also help ensure that there's a diversity of data sets, which could mitigate issues such as bias, etc. We mostly here recommend that the federal government continue its efforts to implement the Open Government Data Act, as well as kind of expand the open government data model to state and local governments, and also expand it to government-owned models. Next is shared computing resources. This is actually very timely because the White Hat OSCP is hosting its first meeting of the National AI Research Task Force actually today. And the challenge here is that AI often requires a lot of compute power, and a lot of entities, especially smaller startups, those in academia, do not have access to those resources. So kind of having shared compute resources is a really important tool to help establish that, to help kind of build that forward. It brings more people into the fold to help develop AI innovations, and it ultimately makes AI more equitable and accessible to a diversity of users. Finally, within this set, we have open source tools and frameworks supported by 50% of respondents. And oftentimes there's a lot of different ideas out there. I think the Deloitte AI framework was one. The Chamber, we have a framework, and there are many others out there about what tools can the private sector entities use to help advance trustworthy AI concepts that can be adopted to help kind of mitigate some of those risks, bias and fairness, explainability, et cetera. One recent example is that the Government Accountability Office recently released a framework on AI, an AI accountability framework, which, very interesting. Also at NIST, tomorrow they're actually releasing an RFI on a NIST AI risk management framework, which was required by the National Defense Authorization Act from last Congress. We believe that these shared tools and researchers can help kind of bring different stakeholders together to help kind of discuss some of these concepts, and also bring consensus to how bias and fairness should be addressed. And they could be in the form of best practices. They could also be in the form of regulations. Probably depends on the context here. Next slide, please. Some additional policy recommendations we looked at are in the education and workforce space, specifically promoting AI skills for K through 12 students, and also establishing retraining and continuing education programs for, at the post-collegiate level. And here, this really, I think, speaks to the evolving nature of AI and the impact on jobs, career selections. Obviously, there's gonna be a lot of new careers and occupations that stem from AI development. As you know, there's a pretty significant worker shortage in this space. So helping ensure that's being conducted at the kind of K through 12 level will help kind of build the talent pipeline for researchers and show that AI is also creating jobs too. Also importantly is there will be a lot of different job impacts resulting from AI. So having a robust set of retraining and continuing education programs will help kind of ensure and help promote a transitioning workforce. Now, I think one important point to reiterate here is that it must be done in collaboration with industry. Industry often knows the various workforce and skills gaps, and kind of can play a very important role in helping retrain and and educate Americans. This next concept here is supporting international partnerships, and this is important because 95% of the world's consumers live outside of the United States, and many U.S. companies, of course, sell outside the United States. So having common conceptions of what trustworthy AI means is very important. And having the U.S. take the lead is particularly important because not every jurisdiction across the world shares our values. There are a couple of different efforts right now on this. There's the Global Partnership on AI, which was established last June. There's the OECD AI Policy Observatory, and there's the new EU-US Trade and Technology Council, where AI will play a role. Any efforts for policymakers to continue to support these and reiterate U.S. Interests and also promote U.S. interests and priorities will be very important to help ensure that kind of the American version of trustworthy AI is promoted globally. Then finally, modeling trustworthy AI in government is also essential. This is one where we took a deeper dive. So could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Oftentimes, and we've seen this in other spaces, government modeling of tech, whether it be cybersecurity, privacy space, they purchase about $90 billion of IT products every single year. That means they have a pretty significant market influence on the direction of different technologies and can kind of help shape the larger market and provide a signal to the private sector. So one of our proposals here is have the U.S. government be the vanguard of adopting trustworthy AI, both in their internal facing applications used internally by agencies and also external facing applications used by the public. We believe if they adopt these trustworthy AI concepts within government, this will then help ensure that these trustworthy AI concepts are adopted elsewhere. And also, too, it will help kind of develop public trust with those technologies because the government is developing and utilizing them responsibly. The government is also a good user as well because they have a lot of diversity of use cases, not just one use case. There's probably hundreds of use cases across the federal government that can be done in this space. And so we have a couple of specific recommendations here that you can see on the screen. The first is that public-facing concepts. So things like a customer service, like an Amtrak chatbot, is a perfect example of that. Using AI for help, for employment benefits is another great concept as well. And it also fits very well within the government's larger theme of IT modernization. Also, they can be used for internal purposes, improving government efficiencies there and as well. One other concept is using AI, federal government using AI to address global challenges such as COVID-19 and climate change. And I know Jordan, in his opening remarks, touched on this briefly. AI applications can be used to forecast weather, detect cyber attacks, discover new medicines and vaccines. And this in turn can help boost public confidence in AI and really also raise the profile of the technology as it's being used. Finally, and I think most importantly, is we need to leverage the procurement process that the federal government uses to promote trustworthy AI. Thankfully, the government's already starting to take action here. Last Congress, the AI and Government Act was included in the omnibus, which required agencies to develop plans and guidelines to help figure out and determine how a particular agency will use an AI application, and also develop guidelines and standards to make sure it's being used responsibly. We believe that that's critical for the AI and Government Act to be implemented quickly and also provide any necessary funds to do so. Also, it's important to look at other recommendations. The National Security Commission on AI has a number of interesting ideas on also to leverage the procurement process to promote trustworthy AI. So I think overall, there's a lot of recommendations in here. Fortunately, there's a lot of action too, but there's a significantly more amount that needs to be done.